For this lesson, you need to open the sample file Earnings Summary 1 from your Sample Files folder. This lesson introduces the if logic function. The if function is one of Excel's most widely used and useful functions. We're going to use it to calculate the standard pay, overtime pay, and bonus in line with the payroll rules that are listed in rows 4, 5, and 6. The rules are that all hours up to 35 hours per week are paid at the hourly rate. Hours over 35 hours per week are paid at time and a half. That's 1.5 times the hourly rate. And if the employee has sales that are above target, then the sales that are above target will have a 5% bonus. So let's start by calculating the standard pay. I'll click in cell F9 and I'll insert an if logic function into this cell. That is formulas on the ribbon, in the function library, the logical group, and in the logical group, there's the if function. The if function requires a logical test and then performs one action if the test returns true and a different action if the test returns false. Let's consider the hours worked by Jack Nicholson. He's worked for 30 hours, so he'll be paid all of those 30 hours at standard rate. But now let's consider Brad Cruz. He's worked for 40 hours. That's more than 35 hours, so he'll be paid for 35 hours at his standard rate and for 5 hours at his overtime rate. So the logical test is going to be whether the employee worked for more than 35 hours. So I'll click in cell E9, hours worked, and then I'll type less than or equal to 35. And if that's true, then the employee worked for less than 35 hours. So I'll click in value if true, and in the case where the employee's worked less than 35 hours, he'll be paid for the hours he did work at the hourly rate. So I'll click on the hours worked and simply multiply them by the hourly rate. And now let's consider what happens if the value is false. In other words, if the employee worked for more than 35 hours. Well, in that case, they'll be paid for 35 hours at standard rate and the excess at overtime rate. So they'll always earn 35 hours multiplied by the hourly rate. I'll now click OK and I'll autofill to the end of the range. And let's audit a couple of those figures. First of all, Jack Nicholson. He's worked 30 hours at an hourly rate of $13. So 390 is correct. That's 30 times 13. And now let's look at Brad Cruz. He's worked 40 hours, so 35 of those hours should be at standard rate. 35 times 15 is indeed 525, so the if function has worked correctly for standard pay. Let's now move on to overtime pay. I'll click in cell G9 and once again insert an if function. That's formulas on the ribbon, function library, logical, and the if function. The logical test, well, that's going to be exactly the same as last time, because only if the employee has worked for more than 35 hours will they receive any overtime pay. So the logical test will be the number of hours worked is less than or equal to 35. And you can see that in the case of Brad Cruz, this is returning false, because Brad did work for more than 35 hours. But if this value was true, and the employee had worked for less than 35 hours, well then he wouldn't get any overtime pay, because he hasn't worked any overtime, so 0 would be the correct result. But if this is false and the employee has worked for more than 35 hours, then the answer is going to be, I'll open a bracket, the hours that they did work, minus the 35 hours that they've already been paid at standard rate, and I'll close the bracket, multiplied by the hourly rate, that's 15, multiplied by 150%. That's 1.5 times the normal pay for the overtime. I'll click OK and I'll autofill to the end of the range. And notice that only the employees that have worked for more than 35 hours are getting any overtime pay. And let's audit one of those figures, the figure for Brad Cruz. He's worked for 5 hours over 35, so the overtime pay should be 5 times 15, which is 75, plus half again, which is indeed 112.50. So I can see that overtime pay is also being correctly calculated. And now let's move on to bonus. So I'll click in cell H9. Once again, formulas, function library, logical, and the if function. And let's think about the logical test this time. Well, employees only get bonus if their sales are above target. So the logical test will be sales are greater than target. Now in the case of Brad, that's returned true. And it's returned true because his sales of 22,000 are above his target of 10,000. So if this is true, the employee is going to receive 5% of the sales that are in excess of the target. So first of all, I'll open a bracket and I'll click on his sales and I will subtract the target. And this gives me the sales above target. And on his sales above target, he's going to receive a 5% bonus. So multiplied by 5%. Now, if the value's false, it means that the employee's sales are below target. And if they're below target, they don't get any bonus. So the answer here is 0. I'll now click OK, and I'll autofill to the end of the range. And notice that only the employees whose sales are above target are getting any bonus. Let's audit one of those figures. Well, in the case of Brad Cruz, his sales of 22,000 are 12,000 above the target of 10,000. And 5% of 12,000 is indeed 600. So the bonuses are being calculated correctly as well. Let's now work out the total pay for the week. Well, it will be the simple sum of cells in columns F, G and H. So I'll click in I9, type equals SU to begin the function, down arrow key twice to the sum, tab key to start the function. This time I think I'll use the mouse to drag across those 3 cells, and when I press the enter key, I can see that Brad Cruz earned $1,237.50 during this week. I'll autofill to the end of the range now. Let's do it a different way. I'll click on cell I9 and double-click on the autofill handle. And I can now see how much each employee is receiving for their week's work. All that remains for this lesson is to save your work. And I'm going to save with the new name Earnings Summary 2. And as usual, I'll save to the folder above my sample files folder. I click the Save button, and you've now completed Lesson 3.5. Use the if logic function.